Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we really try to get behind the headlines on complex issues, get you those insights you need. Have you ever stopped to think that maybe a big development project in your town, kind of pitched as pure progress, all innovation, might actually have something else going on underneath? Or that what looks like a step forward could actually be a huge gamble, maybe with consequences for everyone that nobody's really talking about. That's exactly the kind of thing we're digging into today. We're diving deep into a situation unfolding right now down in Bryan College Station, Texas, specifically around the RELLIS campus. So what's the story? Well, it's this massive proposed development. We're talking nuclear power generation and huge data centers all tied together. On one side, you've got these powerful institutions like Texas A&M framing it as, groundbreaking research, a leap forward for energy needed for the country. But then you talk to people in the community and you hear a very different story. They see it as this giant industrial project, maybe wrapped in secrecy, carrying some really big, maybe unacceptable risks. So to get you the clearest possible picture, we've gathered a whole stack of sources for this deep dive. We've got the official announcements from the Texas A&M system, that's the public face, right? Then their investigative reports looking closer, a really strong op-ed piece pushing back hard, and some really powerful insights from the community itself. We're talking a builder's take on property values, local comments, even questions about whether the city's actions were, well, entirely above board legally. Each piece gives us a different angle. Our mission today really is to unpack all of this, pull out the most important nuggets for you, our listener, so you can really wrap your head around this complicated situation. We'll look at the economic promises, sure, but also dive into the environmental worries, the safety concerns, the big questions about transparency and trust. And ultimately, what could this whole thing really mean for the people living there, the students, and the future of that whole community in Texas?
Yeah, and it's important to remember this isn't just a local Texas story. It really echoes wider issues. Think of it like a case study in how these huge infrastructure decisions get made. It shines a light on that tension, between the grand vision and what it actually means for people on the ground. We'll be connecting the dots here on something that touches everything from like national energy policy and new tech, right down to basic local government and, well, fundamentally, community well-being. It really forces us to ask some tough questions about who's accountable, what risks are acceptable, and what progress even means anymore.
Okay, let's start by unpacking that ambitious vision, the official story coming straight from Texas A&M system. They've announced this pretty significant partnership. 4 companies involved in small modular reactors, or SMRs. You've got Kairos Power, Natura Resources, Terrestrial Energy, and Aalo Atomics. And the plan: to actually build these SMRs right there on the RELLIS campus. This isn't just talk. They're moving forward.
Right. It's definitely not just theoretical. They're actively applying for what's called an early site permit with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC. And the timeline they're suggesting is, well, pretty aggressive. They think they could potentially have reactors built and running within 5 years.
5 years, wow.
Yeah, assuming, and this is a big assumption, that all the permits go through smoothly. It shows they're serious about getting into advanced nuclear tech.
So what are the stated goals? Why are they doing this, according to them?
Well, the public pitch is pretty appealing. They talk about providing clean, steady electricity,
Okay.
and that power is needed for what they call massive new data centers and research facilities, also planned for RELLIS. Beyond that, they say it's about keeping energy costs down and helping the U.S. thrive in the, global energy picture. Big goals. Presented as vital for the nation.
Sounds pretty positive on the surface. Clean energy, research, keeping costs down.
Exactly. And the language around it is quite patriotic almost. Chancellor John Sharp, he's been quoted saying things like, "Plain and simple, the United States needs more power. Texas A&M system stands ready to step up."
Positioning A&M as a national leader then.
Precisely. Not just a local project, but solving a national problem. And you see local officials echoing this. People like State Rep Cody Harris, Mayor Bobby Gutierrez, they talk up the clean, non-carbon aspect of SMRs, framing it as environmentally sound. And of course, they highlight the potential economic boost for Bryan College Station jobs, wages, new infrastructure. The official A&M announcements, the local news reports we looked at, they consistently frame this as this huge transformative win for the region. Lots of optimism.
Okay, so that's the official narrative, the vision of progress. But like you said, there's this strong counter-narrative, people calling it a gamble. And the core reason seems to come down to this one critical fact our sources keep bringing up. Not one SMR has ever been built and operated commercially in the United States. That's kind of a showstopper, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And it's not just a small technical point. It completely changes the nature of the project. The real insight here for any town looking at this kind of tech is if it's first of a kind, your community isn't just getting new technology. You are the test site.
You're the guinea pig, basically.
In a way, yes. You bear the unique risks, the potential for massive delays, the cost overruns that often come with being the first to try and make something like this work commercially, even if it starts off framed as just research. These early nuclear projects face huge hurdles. Just getting the license from the NRC, that usually takes, 7 to 10 years? Best case scenario.
7 to 10 years just for the license.
Yeah, and that's before you even pour concrete. And historically, these kinds of projects are, they're notorious for costing way more and taking way longer than anyone initially projected. It happens again and again. And what's really telling, some sources argue, is that this doesn't look like just some small theoretical nuclear laboratory for education. They point to permits already being pulled for heavy-duty transmission lines going into RELLIS. That suggests something much bigger. We're talking potentially 4 reactors, maybe putting out up to 1 gigawatt of power. And those massive data centers, they're the live load.
Live load, what does that mean exactly?
It means they'll be right there, ready to suck up all that power the second it's generated. A constant, heavy demand. It really underlines the industrial scale of this whole thing.
So that distinction is just huge. The public picture is experimental research, education, sounds safe, academic.
Not controlled.
But the reality, or at least the perceived reality from these sources, is industrial-scale nuclear power generation.
Exactly. It's framed as live fire, not a theoretical nuclear war game. That difference, that gap between the pitch and the perceived reality, that's where all the issues of trust and transparency really start to fester.
Okay, let's dig into that alleged secrecy now, because it seems central to the community's concerns. Our sources talk about rumblings of a data center at RELLIS concealed under NDAs in executive sessions. It sounds like more than just bad communication. It sounds like a deliberate effort to keep the full scope of this hidden from the public.
Well, that's certainly the allegation, and it seems quite widespread based on the materials we reviewed. The use of NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, is mentioned repeatedly. The effect, according to some, is that local leaders appear to be controlled by unnamed players, or at least they couldn't speak freely to their own constituents about what was really going on.
And that just fundamentally undermines the whole idea of public discussion, right? Especially for something this big.
Absolutely. You demand open dialogue for a project that could reshape the community's future so dramatically. Shutting that down breeds suspicion, makes people feel completely powerless. And compounding that, our sources are very clear. No public available for comment was done on an environmental impact of nuclear generation in this community.
Wow. No public comment on the environmental impact for nuclear power.
That's what the sources claim. And if true, that's a major red flag. Standard procedure for projects like this, especially involving nuclear facilities, usually involves extensive environmental reviews. Those reviews typically include public hearings, opportunities for citizens to submit comments, ask questions, raise concerns based on local knowledge. It's a whole process.
A necessary process, you'd think.
Definitely. It's designed to ensure all potential impacts are considered, scientifically scrutinized, and weighed by the public before decisions get locked in. Skipping that, or appearing to skip that, just fuels the feeling that this is being pushed through behind closed doors without the normal checks and balances and makes people wonder, what are they trying to hide?
And it wasn't just NDAs. What are the actions of the Bryan City Council? Our sources mentioned them annexing land near RELLIS.
Yes, and the claim is that this was done specifically to attract data center development and grow the tax base.
Which, okay, attracting development is something cities do. But the timing and the alleged lack of transparency around it, that's where the questions come in.
Precisely. That's where the legal and ethical scrutiny gets really intense. One source brings up a potentially explosive legal point. Contracts can all be canceled if agreements were made without public disclose if impacts public according to Open Meetings Act.
The Open Meetings Act. Explain that a bit.
Basically, it's a law in Texas, like in many states, that requires government bodies to conduct their business openly. Meetings need to be publicly announced, held in public, minutes taken, etc. The public has a right to observe. There are exceptions, like discussing personnel or legal strategy in executive session, but final decisions on matters with broad public impact generally have to be made in the open.
So if deals related to this huge project were made secretly,
If critical agreements, especially ones impacting the public so profoundly, think water, power, land use, or potentially finalized behind closed doors, may be shielded by those NDAs without proper public notice or deliberation, that could be a serious violation of the Act.
And the consequence could be.
Well, potentially, those agreements could be challenged in court and even invalidated. It could throw the whole project into legal chaos and create huge liabilities for the city. It really questions the legitimacy of the process.
So for our listener, maybe living in that area or just watching this unfold, it forces you to ask some hard questions, doesn't it? I mean, is it smart to rush headlong into an unproven nuclear technology? Maybe risking the community's future just for potential tax revenue.
Right.
Are those potential short-term gains worth the very real, maybe very long-term risks to safety, affordability, just the basic quality of life? It's a tough calculation.
It is, and it's exactly what the community seems to be wrestling with.
And then there's this other accusation, one that hits really close to home for anyone connected to Texas A&M. It's the claim that the university's actions here go against its own core values. Our sources specifically say this defies the code that an Aggie does not lie, cheat, or steal. That's a powerful charge within that community.
It's incredibly potent. The Aggie Code of Honor is foundational to the university's identity and culture. So accusing the institution itself of violating it, that's about as serious as it gets. Let's break down how the sources frame this. First, lied. The argument is A&M lied to public that this was research while simultaneously withholding information via NDAs. It's that gap again, presenting it as academic while allegedly enabling a massive industrial project and using NDAs to keep the full picture hidden. That's seen as fundamentally dishonest.
Okay.
Second, cheat. The sources claim A&M is helping to cheat the public out of their water, power, property value, and peace and quiet. This points to the tangible harms. If the project drains water, raises power bills, kills property values, brings constant noise, it's seen as unfairly depriving residents of basic necessities and assets without their informed consent, like exploiting their resources.
And the third one, steal.
Yeah, stealing. This is maybe the most charged allegation. Stealing by bringing in no significant jobs, turning their property values to no value so these data center and nuclear companies can proof of concept their products.
Proof of concept.
Exactly. So they can have a live demonstration to sell their products all on the backs of citizens with no credible remuneration. The idea here is the community is being used as this live fire test, proving the concept of small nukes, powering data centers, taking all the risks, suffering the downsides, just so these companies and maybe A&M can demonstrate the tech and profit from selling it elsewhere, without the community getting a fair share or really any compensation for the burden. It's framed as a fundamental theft of their resources and well-being for outside gain.
These are incredibly serious charges. It speaks to a complete breakdown of trust.
It really does. The ethical implications are just huge. If a community feels it's been lied to, cheated, essentially stolen from by a major institution in its midst, that trust is shattered. And one source asks a really chilling question that gets right to the heart of it. If the community cannot trust you to be upfront with them regarding putting in the 4 nuclear industrial reactors, what makes the community think they can trust you that you will alert them in the event a small leak occurs down the road?
Yeah, that hits hard.
It's not just about money or noise anymore. It's about fundamental safety. Can you trust the institution to tell you the truth if something goes wrong? If that trust is gone, it creates a really deep crisis of confidence.
Okay, let's pivot now to the very real, sort of tangible risks the community is facing, or potentially facing, starting with something absolutely essential: water. Our sources drop what sounds like a bombshell here. The city councils of Bryan and College Station have not been forthright with transparency regarding the drop in water security from 50 years to 10 years. 50 years down to maybe 6? That's staggering.
It is genuinely shocking, if accurate, and the allegation continues that this drastic reduction was kept hidden not just from the public, but also from the city bond rating agencies.
The bond raters?
Yeah.
Why is that significant?
Well, bond rating agencies assess the city's financial health and risk level, which affects how much it costs the city to borrow money for infrastructure, roads, pipes, schools. Water security is a fundamental factor in that assessment. Hiding such a critical vulnerability could be seen as misleading investors, potentially even bordering on fraud, which could have serious legal and financial consequences for the city down the road.
Oh, okay. So a drop from 50 years to maybe 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
What does that actually mean for a growing area like Bryan College Station?
It means an imminent crisis. 50 years gives you breathing room, time to plan. 6 to 10 years, that's practically tomorrow in infrastructure terms. Water is fundamental for everything: drinking, sanitation, industry, agriculture, future growth. And the sources connect this directly to the project. The city should be focused on plans to bring in desalinated water from the Gulf if only 6 years of water is left, not greenlighting water-hungry data centers and very water-hungry industrial nuclear power generation.
That seems logical. If water's running out, find more water. Don't add huge new demands.
Exactly. It highlights what looks like a completely backward prioritization. Tackling a potential water crisis should arguably be priority number one, involving potentially massive, expensive projects like desalination. Instead, the focus seems to have been on attracting industries known to be water-hungry. Data centers need a lot of water for cooling their equipment. And while these new SMRs might be more water efficient than old, giant reactors, industrial-scale nuclear power still needs significant water for its cooling processes.
So what are the long-term consequences if they push ahead with these projects despite the alleged water shortage?
Potentially catastrophic. It could halt future growth. No water, no new homes, no new businesses for current residents. Think water rationing, soaring water bills as the city scrambles for expensive solutions, a decline in quality of life. It fundamentally threatens the region's viability and the alleged deception around bond ratings. That could haunt the city's finances for years.
Okay, water is critical. What about noise? That seems like another big concern. Sources say data centers and power backup systems are very noisy.
They absolutely are. And we're not talking about a gentle background hum. The sources specifically mention industrial-scale noise, 204/7.
24/7. Constant industrial noise.
Imagine living near that. The constant drone from thousands of servers, massive air conditioning units, and then the periodic roar when huge backup generators kick in during tests or power outages. It's more than annoying. It can seriously impact health-disrupting sleep, increasing stress. It drives down property values nearby. And one source makes a striking claim. This noise will cut off city expansion from that whole quadrant. Basically, nobody will want to build or live there. It creates a dead zone for development.
And it's not just the noise now, right? There's this issue of technology changing all the time.
Yes, that's another layer of uncertainty. The source points out, data centers typically become outdated in chip technology each year. With each change, the public is at the whim of what the next chip changeout does to noise, water, and power environmental disruptions.
So every few years, things could change again.
Potentially, yes. Data centers upgrade constantly to keep up with faster, more powerful chips. Each upgrade might mean new cooling systems, different power needs, maybe different backup generators. And each change could bring a whole new set of environmental impacts, different noise levels, maybe more water usage, different power demands. The community has basically no control over this. They're just subject to whatever the next tech cycle brings. It makes long-term planning almost impossible.
Okay, so we've got water worries, noise pollution. What about the financial side for the average person? Our sources suggest that while the investors might do well, the community could face some serious economic pain.
Yes, there's a real concern about who benefits and who pays. One of the most direct worries is about electricity bills. The op-ed we looked at lays it out pretty starkly. If these reactors fail to deliver, the data centers won't disappear. They'll draw hundreds of megawatts directly from ERCOT and Bryan, Texas utilities, driving up local power bills for homes and small businesses.
Wait, so even if the nuclear part fails, the data centers still need power?
Exactly. Those data centers are huge power consumers. If the SMRs aren't built or get delayed or just don't work as planned, the data centers will still pull massive amounts of electricity from the existing Texas grid, ERCO, and the local utility.
And that demand drives up prices for everyone.
That's the fear. Basic supply and demand. Adding hundreds of megawatts of constant demand to the local grid could strain supply and push costs up significantly for every household, every small business in the area. So the promise of cheap nuclear power could actually result in higher bills for everybody else.
Ouch. And then there's property values, we heard from a builder's perspective.
Right. A source identified as having a cost-conscious construction perspective stated bluntly. The value of real estate will drop once public knows that this is industrialization use of nuclear.
That's a direct hit to homeowners' main asset.
It absolutely is. For most people, their home is their biggest investment. If the perception takes hold that they're living next to an industrial nuclear site, especially an unproven one, property values could plummet. That not only hurts individual families financially, but it also erodes the city's tax base, which relies heavily on property taxes to fund schools, police, fire departments, everything. It's a potential downward spiral.
And there's another angle here, too, a power imbalance.
Yeah, this is interesting. One source argues that when you have a massive player involved, like a data center with nuclear-powered generators, with an estimated investment of $15 billion, the city itself kind of loses leverage.
$15 billion. Yeah, that's huge.
It dwarfs the city's own budget and political clout. The source warns the city becomes a fifth wheel in political power, and that potentially the courts will run over the city in holding protections for the city against the whims of the industry behemoth.
So the city might not even be able to enforce its own rules or protect its residents effectively.
That's the concern. That the sheer economic weight of this project could allow it to override local concerns or regulations, leaving the city and its residents with very little recourse.
And what about the jobs? That's always the big promise of these projects. Officials talk about jobs, wages, infrastructure.
Right, that's the standard pitch. But the community perspective we found in the sources directly contradicts that, claiming no significant jobs will actually come from this.
Why the difference?
Well, modern data centers and nuclear plants are often highly automated. They need specialized staff, yes, but maybe not huge numbers, especially after the temporary construction phase is over. If the jobs created are few or highly specialized and don't match the local workforce, then that key economic justification really weakens. It feeds back into that feeling of the community being used for a proof of concept without getting real tangible benefits in return. It supports that stealing accusation from the Aggie Code perspective.
Okay, we have to talk about the biggest risk of all now.
Yeah.
Health and safety, the potential for radioactive exposure.
Yes, this is obviously the most critical concern, the one that overshadows everything else when you talk about nuclear power. Our sources explain that these advanced reactors use new fuels and coolants. And while the companies involved tout passive safety features, designs meant to shut down safely without human intervention, the fundamental worry remains. As the op-ed notes, leaks, however small, could expose our community to radioactive material in air, groundwater, or soil.
Even small leaks.
Over time, yes. Radioactive contamination is insidious. It can build up silently in the environment and the food chain. Even low levels of exposure over long periods are linked to increased cancer risks and other health problems. And cleanup, if even possible, can be incredibly difficult and expensive. The slow, hard-to-detect nature can be just as dangerous as a big accident.
And history gives us some pretty stark warnings about nuclear accidents.
It absolutely does. Our sources bring up key examples to illustrate the potential impact. Think about 3 Mile Island in 1979. It was technically a limited accident, no immediate deaths, but it completely shattered public trust in nuclear power in the U.S. and led to huge regulatory changes.
And Fukushima.
Fukushima in 2011 was even more devastating. Triggered by an earthquake and tsunami, it led to multiple meltdowns, forced hundreds of thousands to evacuate, many permanently, and left behind widespread, long-lasting contamination. Huge areas are still uninhabitable. These aren't just abstract risks. They're real historical events with devastating human consequences.
So connecting those events to RELLIS, it makes the potential risks feel very immediate.
It does. It serves as a powerful reminder that despite all the safety claims and technological advances, things can go wrong with nuclear power. And when they do, the consequences can be truly catastrophic and last for generations. It grounds the debate in reality.
Which leads to that incredibly direct question our sources pose, aimed squarely at parents. Would you feel comfortable to send your 18-year-old off to a university that is just 5 miles away from 4 commercially unproven nuclear power generation industrial units? Especially, it adds, given the alleged lack of transparency from A&M itself.
It's a gut-punch question, isn't it? It raises profound moral and ethical issues for the university. A&M's core mission is education, research, and ensuring the welfare of its students. If the institution isn't seen as being fully transparent about potential risks right next door, risks involving unproven nuclear tech, how does that square with its duty of care? One source even subtly references the Aggie Bonfire Memorial, a powerful reminder of a past tragedy where student lives were lost on campus. It implicitly asks, are we potentially setting the stage for another tragedy, however different, by prioritizing this project over absolute transparency and caution? It puts the university's responsibilities under a very harsh spotlight.
Okay, this next part is fascinating. Our sources draw a parallel to something else that happened in College Station recently, suggesting maybe there's a pattern here. It involves Amazon drone deliveries.
Yes, this is a really interesting anecdote. Apparently, College Station City Council opened the city to experimental Amazon drone deliveries, while the public was very opposed due to noise, disturbance of birds, and cited safety issues.
So the public wasn't keen, but the city allowed it anyway, as an experiment.
That's the story. Despite opposition focused on noise, bothering wildlife, and safety worries about drones flying around, College Station became a testbed. And the source notes that Amazon achieved the notoriety of having completed their live test in the town, holding a very prestigious engineering university.
Leveraging the A&M reputation.
Seems like it. And here's the kicker. Though now the city has banned the continuation of the Amazon drone deliveries, Amazon is greenlighting drone delivery service now in other cities across the U.S.
So it didn't last locally, but Amazon got what it needed, the test data, the PR of having done it near A&M, and now they're rolling it out elsewhere.
Exactly. It shows how a community can be used for a live test, providing valuable real-world data and credibility for a company. Even if the community itself ultimately rejects the project, the company gets the long-term benefit.
And the direct link to the RELLIS project is?
Well, the sources draw a pretty stark and, frankly, alarming parallel. The fear is that the exact same thing could happen with the nuclear and data center project. One source puts it this way. This running the live nuclear power generation, running attached industrial-scale data centers at the RELLIS Texas A&M campus, even if failed in local public perspective, will serve to, based on the credentials of Texas A&M, will falsely propagate the notion to other unsuspecting citizens in other cities that this technology is tested and proven commercially because it was done at Texas A&M, like in the Amazon delivery drone case.
Wow. So even if it's a disaster locally, the fact that it happened at A&M gives it a stamp of approval that can be used to sell it somewhere else.
That's the core concern, that A&M's prestigious engineering reputation could be exploited. Even if the RELLIS project faces huge local problems, noise, water issues, safety scares, cost overruns, the companies involved could still point to it and say, look, we ran this at Texas A&M. It creates this potentially false veneer of credibility.
Yeah.
They could use the A&M tests to pitch these SMRs or data center setups to other cities, maybe cities less equipped to scrutinize the claims, downplaying any local failures at RELLIS. It basically turns a local experiment, regardless of its actual success or failure on the ground, into a kind of national endorsement simply because of the A&M name. It's a way to potentially bypass skepticism elsewhere.
Okay, so given all these concerns, the secrecy, the risks, the potential pattern of being used as a test site, it makes sense that people are demanding accountability. What form is that taking?
Well, it's escalating. Our sources mention calls for a full recall effort targeting the city councils in both Bryan and College Station. That's a pretty drastic step.
A recall. That means trying to remove elected officials from office before their term is up.
Exactly. It signals a complete loss of faith in the current leadership, a belief that they've fundamentally failed their constituents. And the grounds cited for the recall are serious. One source suggests just the concealment of the water security issue during the last election and the defrauding of bondholders who were entitled to higher interest rates is enough for the Attorney General to compel the city secretary to allow a recall petition to proceed to a vote.
So they're focusing on the alleged water security cover-up and the potential misleading of bond investors.
Yes, the argument is that these actions are so egregious, potentially deceiving voters about an existential resource and possibly defrauding financial institutions, that they meet the threshold for initiating a formal recall process under Texas law. These aren't just policy disagreements, they're accusations of serious misconduct that could legally justify letting the citizens vote on whether to keep these officials in office.
It really highlights that citizens aren't powerless, right?
Yeah.
There are mechanisms like recalls, like the Open Meetings Act we discussed earlier, designed to hold officials accountable.
Absolutely. These tools exist precisely for situations where the public feels transparency and responsible governance have broken down. Knowing about them, understanding how they work, it empowers people. It reminds everyone that public trust isn't just a nice to have, it's fundamental. And when officials potentially violate that trust or the laws ensuring transparency, there are avenues for citizens to push back and demand accountability. It's a cornerstone of local democracy.
So if this whole nuclear project is seen as such a gamble, what are the alternatives? Surely there are other ways to meet energy needs.
Yes, and our sources are quite clear on this. The op-ed in particular lays out several proven, safer options that are available right now. They list things like renewables with battery storage, efficiency improvements, and proven gas turbine backup.
Okay, so solar, wind, batteries, just using less energy, and maybe natural gas for reliability.
Essentially, yes. These aren't experimental ideas. They're established technologies being deployed widely. They don't have that first-of-a-kind risk profile that comes with SMRs. And the point made is that these solutions can all support new data centers without gambling on untested nuclear. The need for power for data centers is real, yes, but it doesn't automatically mean you have to go down the SMR path. There are other ways.
And why are these alternatives seen as better for the community?
Well, the argument is pretty straightforward. These solutions are faster, cheaper, and safer.
Faster, cheaper, safer. That sounds pretty compelling.
It is. They might not generate the same kind of cutting-edge buzz as new nuclear tech, but the sources argue they carry far fewer risks for Bryan College Station residents and Texas A&M students.
Yeah.
It puts that allure of the new and exciting into perspective against the potential downsides for the people who actually live there.
So the call from the community isn't necessarily anti-progress, but pro-caution, pro-transparency.
Exactly. It's a demand for a more responsible approach. Full transparency about all the risks and benefits, independent reviews by experts who aren't tied to the project, and solid guarantees to protect local families from negative impacts. These alternatives offer a way to meet energy goals without taking on the huge uncertainties and potential dangers of unproven nuclear tech, without risking skyrocketing bills or environmental harm, and certainly without the shadow of potential radiation exposure. It's about choosing a path that prioritizes the community's long-term health and stability over, well, a high-stakes gamble. Hashtag tag outro.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground today, digging into this RELLIS project near Bryan and College Station. We've seen that real tension between the promise of innovation, the cutting edge, versus the significant risks of technology that just isn't proven yet. We've looked at that push for economic growth clashing with community well-being and just how absolutely critical transparency is when it comes to local government making huge decisions. It's a complicated picture.
It really is. And I think the biggest takeaway, for me anyway, is that while progress, new technology, that's all important, it just can't come at the expense of public trust or safety or essential resources like water. This situation really shows how the details, especially the ones maybe kept quiet or downplayed, can have the most massive consequences for real people. The real cost isn't always just in dollars, is it? It's often very human.
So it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? In a time when technology moves so fast, maybe faster than our understanding or our rules can keep up, how can communities, maybe your community, make sure they're really informed? How do you ensure you have a real voice, real control, when these huge projects come along that could change everything? And maybe more pointedly, what level of risk are you willing to accept? Especially when big promises are made, but key details seem hidden, or when your town might just be the testing ground for something meant to be sold elsewhere. We really hope this deep dive encourages you to look closely at what's happening in your own backyard. Ask those tough questions. Dig deeper than the official press releases. Seek out the full story. Because being that well-informed citizen, that engaged resident, that's ultimately what empowers communities. And that's what we're all about here at the Deep Dive.